Is the 2024 Yamaha MT-07 the best beginner bike on the market today? Let's talk about it. Gotta embrace this urban plight real quick for the gram. Are you seeing all this plight, kids? All right. So what are we talking about today, guys? Oh yeah, we're talking about what makes a good beginner bike. Namely, is the Yamaha MT-07 a good beginner bike? Go down this real quick skate ramp. Feel like a freaking dual sport rider again. All right, so we're talking about, is the Yamaha MT-07 a good beginner bike? So I think just about every bike could be a good beginner bike. It just really depends on the rider. I've seen people that started on Ninja 300s that have immediately yeeted themselves in the woods, and then I've seen people be completely fine on a brand new Panigale 959 Corsa edition. It is entirely dependent on the rider. I get the question all the time on the channel, and I get the question all the time in my personal life. Hey Paramoto, is XYZ a good beginner bike? Hey Paramoto, should I start on this bike? Should I start on that bike? I'll be honest with you, I don't really answer those questions anymore because I really had to ask questions to answer them. You come to me and you're like, hey, you know, is a R6 a good beginner bike? You know what, if you have 10 years experience on a dirt bike and riding a bike is not challenging to you, then yeah, very well could be a good beginner road bike. But if I would have started on an R6, I would have died, you know, straight up. Like, that's just how things are. Like, it is such an incredibly personal question to ask somebody if something is a good beginner bike. You know, what is good for me as a motorcycle now might not always be good for everybody else. What works for some does not work for all, and honestly, it's such a difficult question to ask. It's so loaded and so personable. You know, like, you have life experience to take into account, maturity to take into account, the use of the motorcycle to take into account, riding experience to take into account. There's just so many different variables. It's next to impossible to give somebody a straight answer. And that's why I really generally do not answer this question anymore. I don't answer it, and I try not to field this question too much. So I think to even start broaching the topic of what is a good beginner bike, I have to really describe what a beginner bike really is, or what a suitable beginner bike is, I should say. I think there's a lot of boxes that can be checked, and like I said, it could be totally different for every single person. But I generally define a good beginner bike as something that is upright, something that is comfortable, something that is got that flick going on, that side to side, super easy, light, flickable bike, just like this MT is. And I would probably say a good beginner bike probably has 50 horsepower or less. That might be the hottest take on this video, is how much horsepower a good beginner bike should have. But I think about 50 is perfect. 30 and 40 is very anemic. I think about 50 will get your attention. Other than that, there's multiple other things to consider and think about, like why this person just keeps on stopping for no reason. There's other things to think about, like, is it Japanese, is it American? I would say the Japanese because they're generally very reliable. The last thing you want to do on a beginner bike is just be fixing it constantly, or having your beginner bike being at the dealership constantly. Probably don't start with a KTM. I've heard terrible things about reliability with KTMs. It's just, some people get really good ones, some people just, a freaking thing is at the dealership every single day. You never know. I'd say getting a naked bike would be one of the best things that you could do for yourself. I would highly suggest that a naked bike makes a really good first bike for multiple reasons. Number one is that if you wanted to fix something, like all the fairings are already off, everything that you would need to have access to, you already have access to. There's already less of a barrier to entry with a naked bike. If you can access everything already as far as the parts and everything, then you can also mod it and work on it yourself too. If you get a naked bike that fits the above criteria, then I think that's 100% the best category of motorcycle to get as your first bike. They're almost all upright, they're almost all comfortable, they're almost all, you know, fairingless, so it's easy to work on, it's easy to mod. Modding is a big thing. Making the bike yourself, is it easy to mod? Is it too expensive? Naked bikes generally won't be. You know, anytime you need a bolt, it's pretty much already there. Your bolts and all your plastic stuff is already there, already out the way. So I would say go for a naked bike. Being a naked bike, so I mentioned it earlier, and that is the flickability of the motorcycle. The flickability of the motorcycle will make it very comfortable for you to go ahead and get turns in. you know, your flickability is good for you to learn now, and it makes the bike more fun later when you get more skills and ability underneath you. So this would probably be considered a lesser important thing for most people, but I think it was really important for me. When I had my little Ninja 300, the looks of the bike weren't that great. You know, yeah, it did look like a little 600, like that bike that we just passed, but like when you parked it next to other motorcycles, it looked tiny. Like, I think the tire setup was like a 110 up front and like a 140 in the back. They were really small tires. And one thing about parking this bike next to other bikes is that it's the same size. It doesn't look like a toy next to a 600, which is a big deal for, well, I mean, it will be a big deal for you as a beginner. You know, you don't want to be embarrassed about the bike that you're parking around people. You know, so this bike is the size of a normal motorcycle. Also, it has a 180 on the back. Beginners and you don't know, a 180 tire is a standard size of most superbike tires. So if you park this bike next to another bike, just the width of the rear end alone will look normal. It will all line up, be like, oh, okay, so you know that's a fully fared race bike, and then like this one's a naked bike, but it's like roughly the same size. It's not gonna be embarrassing to park this bike, you know, next to another motorcycle. Like I said, these things are very unimportant to most people, but you know, if you've ever been embarrassed because you have a really small motorcycle, like they're not going to be unimportant to you. Speaking of being embarrassed about the motorcycle, it'll give you something that I call moped syndrome, where you're having a blast on your bike, but you don't want to be seen with it. You don't want to be seen on the damn thing. You know, I call it moped syndrome for a reason, because like, yeah, mopeds could be super fun, and the guys on this channel might have different correlation with what a moped is, but honestly, like, you just don't want to be seen on one, and it's embarrassing. So you end up being on your little 300 meat machine, and it's just like, you know, it's the smallest bike in every crowd, and it's just like, you're just sitting there like, oh man, I wish I had something bigger, and you're just kind of embarrassed, but you're still having fun, but you're just embarrassed. You know, really the biggest thing about your beginner bike is that it should be something that encourages you to ride. You know, it's something like a little 300, it might not check that box for you, because you might be embarrassed, it might be too slow, you might get bored of it easily, and that box might not get checked to encourage you to ride thing. You know, it might be really fun for a month or two when you're like flicking it around traffic and everything, but eventually you are literally just going to be full throttle almost everywhere. You're just going to be like, you're gonna go through all the gears by 35 miles an hour, and at first that's really cool, like you get to use all of your motorcycle. All the things that I've been describing to you guys, like not having moped syndrome and having a bike that you can essentially grow into and encourages you to ride. This is the point of the video where we are going to start transitioning. Does the MT-07 meet that? Does the MT-07 meet that criteria of not being a moped, of encouraging them to ride, of having plenty enough power to grow into? Is it flickable? Is it all these things that we've been talking about this entire time? So, does the MT-07 meet all these criteria of just generally encouraging you to be a good motorcycle rider? And you know what, I would say generally yes. I would say generally yes. There are some things that you should be aware of as far as being an MT-07 owner and rider. Some of the bigger ones is that it has probably double the horsepower of a standard beginner bike. This bike has 70 or so horsepower, which is generally double of a normal 300 to 400 cc beginner bike. Might be too much at first, but if you're mature and you know enough about yourself to be like, okay, so this bike has more power than I'm used to, maybe I need to dial it back a little bit, maybe I need to close that throttle a little bit, you know, maybe I'm not that talented yet, or maybe I need to just go on the freeway and get it and get that throttle twist out of my system. That way when I'm in the streets, you know, I'm going in and around people, I can get all that stuff out of my system and I can just chill. I don't have to be a hooligan, which honestly a lot of us like to be hooligans. Let's not kid ourselves. So besides for this bike having roughly double the horsepower of what your standard beginner bike will have, it also has a couple things that you need to be aware of. The throttle on this bike is on-off. I mean, it's just a general complaint that people have with this bike, and I can see why. It takes very minor adjustments on this throttle to make it go in a continuous speed. And if you just do anything else but just very minor adjustments, you're going to get more gas than you probably intended. You don't have experience as a motorcycle rider, it could be difficult to handle. It really could be. I have roughly 10 years of experience riding. Every once in a while, even with my experience, I find myself getting like thrown back, and like a little bit of whiskey throttle happens. And you know, I know generally enough how to ride a motorcycle to be able to handle it without that big of a problem. But if you're a noob and whiskey throttle is already something that may happen to you, this could be a bike that it definitely happens to, and it could be really bad considering that it's got 70 horsepower and it is torquey as all get out. It's not something to turn you off. It's not something to really, like, you know, steer you away from the MT-07, but it's something to be aware of when you buy it, you know? When I was new and I was riding my little 300, there was things that I would go over every single time I rode. You know, it was just like where to position your hand, what this bike likes, and for the first little bit, every time I get on the bike, I would just be chill. I'd be chill, and I tried not to not twist the throttle too much, and I would try to be very present in every little input that I put into the bike. And you know, now I just jump on a bike and it's just kind of second nature to me. I don't even put a full foot down. I put like a big toe down. Like I literally point my toes all the way down and I wedge my foot against the peg like the floor is lava, and I barely even touch the ground when I come to a stop anymore. You know, everybody will get there eventually, but when you're new, it takes a minute. The rest of the things that I really brought up about this bike is like the flickability and the power delivery and stuff. I have to say that means that there's a lot of room to grow into this motorcycle. This is the funnest big bike that feels like a little bike I've ever had. So the bike is extraordinarily flickable. Like, it just feels like it just wants to dive into turns, and it feels like I'm on like almost like a dual sport. And when you get more comfortable with riding, you're going to be pulling this bike into turns. You're really going to be cranking this bad boy into them because you're going to get comfortable with it. And you know, from the start, it's just gonna feel like it's a very responsive motorcycle that's very forgiving to your movements, and it's easy to get around obstacles and stuff. And at the end, you're gonna really start using that for speed. It's not gonna be like a big, heavy, like Harley or something like that where you're just struggling to move it. This thing is gonna be comfortable. It's about 390 pounds. It's gonna be a very comfortable bike for you to go ahead and start on. The power is just as much a positive as it is a negative. You know, when I had my 300, I got really bored really fast. I was, you know, in Ohio, so I got my bike in May of 2013, and literally by the next winter I was already bored. Hello. And to be honest with you, I got bored, but I also just like, I grew out of that bike. I really grew out of that motorcycle because it just didn't have the power. This bike does. You know, my 300 had about 30 or so odd horsepower. This one's got 70. Even me, for an experienced rider, this is plenty of horsepower. This is plenty. Like, I can have fun in the street. It's not gonna be like a super bike that's constantly like being like a puppy, like wants to play, wants to encourage you to do dangerous things. It's just gonna be there for you. It's just gonna be a good amount of power when you get used to it. Like, if there was a gauge for beginner bikes, you know, a green, yellow, red gauge, Ninja 300 would be in the green, and then like I would say a super bike, a 600 or 1000 would be in the red. This wouldn't be solid yellow. Like, it would be like, it's gonna be good for most people if they're cautious. Honestly, I think in a lot of ways the MT-07 is a Goldilocks of motorcycles. It's kind of in between everything. It's not stupid fast, it's not slow. You can do plenty of things with it. It's not going to limit you. It's going to encourage you to ride, but you need to be careful if you're a beginner. You definitely need to be careful on this bike if you're a beginner. It's not going to kill you, but if you do stupid things, it's going to get you in trouble really quick. Really cool thing about this bike is the fact that, like, pretty much everybody that's ever ridden one has good, positive things to say about it, which says a lot about this motorcycle. You got experienced riders, people that have been riding for 10, 20 years, that ride this bike, and then they just get giggle face. They're just happy because this bike is so fun. It's so fun in so many different ways, and everybody that rides a bike like this, everybody that rides these bikes loves them, which says a lot. Well, I'm perfectly happy with this bike with 10 years of experience. Downgrading from super bikes to something that's comfortable, plenty of power to still have a little bit of fun, and honestly, just I feel like I could ride this bike all day long, and I think this would make a good beginner bike for somebody that is careful. So I just want to say, whichever bike you choose to ride as a beginner, whether it's an MT-07, a Ninja 300, Ninja 400, Ninja 500, Ninja 600, it doesn't matter. Every single one of these bikes has a possibility of getting you killed if you don't treat them with respect. Every bike that you get, you need to treat with respect. Have to be cognizant of what you're doing at all times. My biggest suggestion to you guys is take your MSF course, your Motorcycle Safety Foundation course, And then every single time you go to get on your motorcycle, every time you do a circle of awareness, just like, here's where all my stuff is. If this happens, I'm going to do this. Start planning. If bad things happen, what you're going to do. You know, like play what ifs. Like if this guy decides to quickly go left, what is my game plan? Right now would be probably just brake hard. If I go faster than him, it's to get away from him. You know, all sorts of things. And then just be cognizant. Be as present as you can be at all times while you're on your motorcycle, and you should be fine. Wrecks happen to everybody, even to good riders. I'll be honest with you, I've been in 2, one of which I determined is my fault, and the other one I think was just random bad luck. Careful, have fun with whatever you get, and you know, honestly, have fun. Biggest thing is have fun. My recommendation is, if you're a conscientious rider, the MT-07 could 100% be a fantastic beginner bike for you. May riding season is really about to start, and I just wanted to say I hope you guys have a great riding season. I hope everything goes well for you. I hope you get the bike of your dreams and you go on some good rides with some good people. That's it for today's video, though. I really appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate everything everybody's doing for this channel to get it back to better than it's ever been. And that's it for today. See you guys in the next video. Deuces.